get started? Is that okay?
Of course, that sounds great.
I don't want to hold up the folks who've joined us, although I see three of my friends online here in the audience. So this is going to be a very intimate presentation of this tool. I've got Jim Fidolfi, John, and Keith online here. And welcome, guys. I'm glad that you joined us. I'm not sure where your 397 other colleagues are, but they would all benefit if they were to join this. And so it's be up to you to carry the flag and to be able to instruct them on how to use iPlatform or share the link out, because we will be recording this, and so they'll have access to that. But thanks for joining us. I mean, I'm just going to be here in the beginning, and then I'm going to hand you off to Mike and Lauren, who are going to take you through a detailed presentation about iPlatform and show you how to use the various functions and capabilities to be able to get as much information as you want relative to what's going on in education. The genesis of iPlatform really was when I first came to the department. What I quickly realized is that we sit on a vast amount of information. We've got data warehouses that store all kinds of details about the performance and participation in our education system. Much of that, when I first got here, much of that data was kind of locked away behind these, into these data systems that was inaccessible. So we ended up responding to lots of right to know requests to produce this information. And so what we did is we created iPlatform to make that information kind of ubiquitously available to the public. And we did it in a way and with some technology that makes it easy to access, easy to understand. They'll be walking through both iPlatform, but iReport, as well as Explore. Make sure you guys cover both of those here. And one is going to be more static information. If you just want to go in and you want to look at a particular district and get some information about how that district has performed across a variety of different metrics, you'll be able to see that. And then when you get into iExplore, the original concept for that was almost as if you're in a car buying experience and you want to compare Model 1 to Model 2, you can pick some attributes and you can compare different systems. You can actually create some various graphing on that and plots to be able to see, how different pieces of information compare, and even draw a regression line in there to see what the trends might look like in that information. Part of the reason why we wanted to do this is really to create conversations around the state. Oftentimes I had been in meetings, and many of you probably have as well, and folks are talking about what's going on in education. And if you have knowledge of it, you recognize that we're talking past one another because they don't have the same information or they have inaccurate information. So they're drawing conclusions about education that are not based on the actual underlying data. And so this platform allows you to have conversations at a state level as a state representative, locally in your communities, around the kitchen table if you need to figure out kind of what's going on. And so thank you. I appreciate you joining us this evening. I think that you'll find the presentation beneficial. I think you'll find the tool beneficial. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, I'm sure that Mike and Lauren will be able to answer them. And if they don't answer your questions, I know all three of you guys, and you will reach out to me and you'll ask me the questions anyway. So Mike, take it away. And thank you so much again, folks, for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And thank you, representatives, for joining us today. I am Mike Schwartz, as the Commissioner mentioned. We've been working with the department for almost 20 years now, primarily around data and technology. And I'm excited to be able to share this tool with you. We're joined today by Lauren Mercier in the middle here, and she has been a school counselor for many years in the New Hampshire schools at all levels, and she is helping in these trainings as well as we go forward. Also, Dina Raybach has been with the department for many years. Dina is not here with us today, but she is the mastermind behind iPlatform. Dina has got years of technology experience, but she also has an amazing understanding of education data and education policy. And so she's really able to think about ways that we can take this data and present it to you, hopefully in meaningful ways that can inform policy decisions throughout the state. Dina, as part of what she's done from a technical perspective, is she, along with the commissioner, built this tool so that it's something that's housed within the department. And what that means is that we have the ability to change it. So Dina is constantly looking for input from you, from any of the stakeholders out there, for ways that we can get more data, different presentations to make this as valuable as possible. So please, as the commissioner said, give us feedback and let us know what works, let us know what doesn't work, let us know where you might want to add some more information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I know your time is precious. But what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what iPlatform is about. We will actually take a look at it through some PowerPoint or some Google slides and see what it looks like. Then I'll try to jump into a live demo. I'll go through a handful of components of the system. I'm not going to go through everything, or we'll be here for hours, but I'll definitely give you some of the highlights, show you how to get started with it. And then also hopefully talk through some scenarios, some things that you might be thinking if I was a state legislature, things that I might be considering. And we'll look at how you might find answers to that within iPlatform. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about what's coming as we go forward. There's a small group today, so by all means, if you want to raise your hand, there's probably a button to raise your hand or submit a chat, and we can unmute you, give you a voice if you want to talk. Also, feel free to put questions in the chat or the Q&A session, and Lauren will be monitoring those as well. I don't know, Lauren, if you've got a preference for one or the other, feel free to state it.
Yeah, whatever works for folks on the call is fine.
Great. If you put it in the chat, I think everybody gets to see it. If you put it in the question, then maybe only Lauren sees it. So whichever your preference is. Okay. So as the commissioner mentioned, the commissioner came to the department, and one of the things that he's a strong believer in is this concept of making things as transparent as possible. At least this is my interpretation, and to be able to make sure that all stakeholders have access to the data so that we collectively can help improve education in New Hampshire. As he mentioned, you can't make clear decisions if you don't really understand the data behind it. So getting access to the data hopefully empowers you to make better decisions for the state. As you mentioned, there's a lot of data that the state's been collecting. We collect data about charter schools, we collect data about regular traditional schools, we collect data about suspensions, about math and science, we collect data about teachers. So all this data is in the department's website or in the department's databases. But it's not necessarily in a fashion that is really accessible. What iPlatform about is taking all that information and putting it in a form that really makes some meaning for you, for any of the stakeholders to understand that data. All the data in iPlatform is public. So this is not, we're not showing you student level data. We're not divulging anything that should be private about a student. We're giving you total counts about aggregate groups of students within the state. It is, as it's public, the system doesn't require a login. Anybody can go to it. You can't break it. So we encourage you to go into iPlatform and just play around and see what you find. If you get stuck with something, again, reach out to us and we'll help you find it. The data that's in iPlatform in part came out of some accountability requirements. So there are both, for those of you who are not familiar, there's both federal and state accountability requirements on things that the state has to report about how our schools are performing. Those indicators that we report based on law include things around academic achievement. Academic achievement is measured primarily by the state assessment tests. So the state gives assessment tests to kids in grades 3 through 8 and 11. That's in math and English and science. That information is then reported as one way to judge how schools are accountable or how they're performing. There's something called the growth percentile. So we'll talk more about that later, but it allows you to actually look at how students are growing compared to similar students around the state. There's information about ELP, which is English language proficiency. So we don't have a large population, but we do have a fairly substantial population in New Hampshire of students who English is their second language. And so one of the things that we as a state have to be accountable for is making sure that those students are able to progress as well.
Mike, excuse me, so sorry to interrupt you. I think I hear you clicking the tab for there you go. You. now we're on. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, for interrupting me. and just to help, this was the chart I was talking about all that data that's in the system. That's what I was referring to. Now you can see it. And thank you, Lauren. I apologize for that. And then actually, I also should show you Dina. There's Dina, and there's Lauren, who you probably didn't see before, but you've seen Lauren's video anyway. So again, reach out to us. And this is what we're going to be talking about. So as I was talking about the accountability indicator, so there's achievement data, there's this growth information, there's information about English learners, there's school quality. One of the big focuses that states are supposed to have is helping make sure that students who are struggling, that they also are achieving. And so there's this equity indicator that looks at students who are struggling in the state. How are they growing? How are they doing compared to other similar students that are struggling? And then in the high school level, we've got similar characteristics as well, something called the graduation rate, which obviously you all understand, but it's looking at the percentage of students that graduate high school. That information is kind of the core of what we're presenting, but there's a lot more information. There is information about finances. There's information about college and career readiness. So there's a lot more information. There's information about teachers and what's the teacher population look at in schools. There are two main components of iPlatform. There's something called iReport, and there's something called iExplore. iReport, as the commissioner was describing, is this idea of a report card. It's kind of a snapshot at the end of the year of how did a school or a district perform. And so there is lots of information on this report card for a school. So similar to your physical results you get when you get a health physical, or similar to your report card that your student or your child may get at the end of the school year. This is a report card describing the schools or the district and the districts. So it has information, as the information I talked about a minute ago, things like achievement. It also has information about suspension and expulsion. It has information I mentioned earlier about cost per pupil. So a lot of information about schools and districts, but it's a snapshot at the end of the year of how those schools are performing. iExplore, as the commissioner described, it allows you to take these different indicators, so something like English language proficiency or something like cost per pupil, and it lets you look at that not for one school or one district, but across the entire state. So it lets you take a view into what is the cost per pupil for every district in the state or for every school in the state. If you are representing a certain group of towns or schools in your area as a representative, what are those cost per pupil looks like for your schools compared to other schools in the state. We'll take a look at both of these components. So what does it look like and how do you get to it? So I'm just going to quickly escape over here and just go to another browser. The easiest way to get to iPlatform is simply to type iPlatform NH. If you Google that, it should come up right at the beginning, and you click on it, and this brings you to the landing page for iPlatform. On that landing page, you'll have your choice for iReport or iExplore. You'll also be able to jump from iReport to iExplore, and I'll show you a little bit of that as well in this demo. When you come to iReport, so we're looking at here, this is the first page, landing page for iReport. As I mentioned earlier, it's a report card about a school or district, so the first thing you have to do is select a school or a district that you want to view. So you can choose any one in the state, and you can click to view the report. That'll then bring you to the page for that given school or district. Here we're looking at Manchester. And the primary way you move around iReport or iExplore is through these tabs at the top of the page. So here, just as I was showing you before, the different types of information that's on the report card for a school or district, that information is along these tabs. And you can click on any tab to find information about the achievement of students, about the educators in Manchester School District, about the amount of money that's spent per student and how it's broken down. iExplore, similar concept. When you're in that, you'll see tabs across the top. And these tabs let you do different functions to look at that data throughout the state. So you can explore, and that just lets you explore a given indicator. So here we're looking at cost per pupil, and it shows you the cost per pupil for every district we're looking at in the state. It actually graphs it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It lets you compare multiple districts or multiple schools. It lets you discover information where you can actually look at how two different variables interact. And we'll look at that. How does the cost per pupil translate to math proficiency? Is there a correlation between the two? It lets you search for information. This is a great example, and we'll walk through one about how you might want to look for similar schools to your schools in your district or the districts you represent. So iExplore lets you explore that information across schools throughout the state. If you've played with this before, I just want to point out some recent enhancements. One is that this integration between iExplore and iReport that I talked about before, where you can jump from iReport, where you're looking at one school, and jump immediately to iExplore to look at one indicator across all the schools in the state. There's some hover or pop-ups, so you'll see, I'll show you some examples where if you hover over some data, you might get more information. Well, there's a lot of longitudinal information. We'll actually show an example of where a pop-up gives you some longitudinal data. There's download, you can download the data, so you can download it to Excel and then play with it yourself. This works better on a mobile device than it did in the past. And there's some other printing report cards is a great thing. If you want to print out a report card for a given school or district within your area you represent, you can do that very easily. And then most of our recordings, we make sure that we record and post videos of how to use the system. So those are also posted and available throughout the system. Okay, I'm going to jump into a live demo. One thing that I'm going to mention up front too here is I'm going to go into this demo in what's called our test environment, but this system is live just where I showed you before. There is a slight problem right now that the system that was posted live for all of you to access is on the same server that the COVID system is for the pandemic for the state of New Hampshire, and that server needs a little bit more strength. And so you might find some performance issues where it takes a little bit longer to get to these different pages. I'm going to show you this test environment because it's working a little faster here. Please know we're aware of it and the department's working on trying to improve the performance, working with the Office of Information Technology. Okay, so I am going to go, and actually I've already logged in here, but I'm actually going to go back to the search page. So I'm going to first show you iReport. So from that landing page before, so from this landing page here, I'm going to click on iReport, and that brings us to this page. And like I said earlier, the first thing you do is I'm going to select the school that I want to look at, and there's a long list of all the schools in the state. If you click on that and you just type in the first letters of the school you want to look at, like I'm going to type in Portsmouth, it'll just show you the ones that match that word. So it's an easy way to find a school throughout the state. We'll go take a look at Portsmouth Middle School, and we'll click View Report. And what that's going to do is launch iReport, showing us those tabs across the top for the given school that we're looking at, Portsmouth Middle School. It shows you where the school is. The first, it brings you to the profile. It shows you where that school is geographically. It shows you the information, some basic information about the enrollment of those students, how many students are in that school. It shows you information about what percentage of those students are living in poverty, economically disadvantaged, what percentage have disabilities. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you hover over some of this information, you'll actually see some pop-ups. So here, if I hover over student enrollment, we can see the change in enrollment longitudinally from 2019 to 20 to 21. In this case, it looks like it's been fairly static. It's dropped maybe a slight handful of students. You can hover over the indicator like economically disadvantaged, and again, see some information longitudinally over time. So one thing I noticed here is that the percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged dropped from 21% in 2019 down to 16% in 2021. And some of you in the legislature may have heard of this issue that's happened throughout the state a bit, that during the pandemic, because many schools were offered the ability to provide free lunch for all students in the school as part of the pandemic funds, it meant that less families were willing or interested in indicating that they're eligible for free and reduced lunch. And as a result, some schools had a hard time determining how many students are truly free and reduced eligible. And so I suspect that's part of the reason we've seen a drop. It certainly could be the demographics of Portsmouth as well, but for many schools, that is something they've been struggling with, and I think they're trying to address now. So I'll go ahead, and I'm not going to show you all of these. I will click on Overview just for a second, because the Overview gives you some information about many of these other tabs. So you'll see Student Achievement is similar to the Achievement tab. Student Environment here is School Environment, similar to Environment. Educator Information is this Educator profile. So the Overview gives you some overview information. These other tabs then give you more information about student achievement or about educators, etc. You'll see common themes throughout the system. So one thing you'll see is color is meaningful. So in this case, we see a light blue means you're in the top 25% within the state. Gray means you're in the middle 25%, and yellow means you're in the bottom 25%. And so what that's showing us is here for ELA proficiency, 66% of the students are proficient in Portsmouth Middle School in English. And this, again, we're using the state assessment test to measure proficiency. And what it's saying is that they're in the top 25%. So having 66% of your students proficient is in the top 25% of all schools in the state. So these indicators of top, lower isn't supposed to indicate that it's good or bad. It's just telling you, are you in the top or the 25% of the schools with the highest in this area, or the lowest 25% or the middle 50%. Clearly, somebody living in Portsmouth who is concerned about school spending might say that average teacher salary being in the highest quartile is not a good thing. Others in Portsmouth, parent may say, I want to spend more money on my teachers, and that's a good thing. So again, it's not there to determine judgment. It's just there to give you some perspective of kind of where that stands across the entire state. I'm not going to go through all these tabs. Let me go through a couple of them. I'll go through into environment, because this is something I want to point out, because it's something you might want to be aware of and think about. You will see in environment, what we're looking at for a school is the in-school and out-of-school suspension rate, as well as the expulsion rate. In all of these tabs, not all these tabs, most of these tabs, you'll see a similar structure where you'll see information about the indicator. So environment, we're looking at that information about the indicator. You'll also see information over time. So you'll typically see information about that indicator for multiple years, 19, 20, 21. And then you also see information in context. So where is Portsmouth middle school compared to the district, compared to the state? One of the things you'll notice here over time is that their suspensions, especially in-school suspensions, drop quite a bit. Well, not surprising with the pandemic, especially with a lot of virtual education, and also the fact that many students, when students were in school, quite frequently they were in smaller class sizes. We saw much less suspension and behavior issues this past year. So suspensions have dropped significantly across the entire state. That's one thing we're going to have to look out for and see over the next couple of years as kids are back in person. We've already seen that there have been some concerns from schools about behavior. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to suspension information over time. And that might inform policy. Clearly, if you see the suspension rate go way up, then might tell you something that might inform policy decisions going forward. I'm going to go through a couple of these fairly quickly because I think it'll be meaningful for you. But I also am in sensitive time, so I won't take too long. Achievement, as I mentioned earlier, we have English, math, and science. Something to point out is if you click on this little arrow to the right, you'll get what's called a flyout. And so here we see 66% of the students perform proficiently in English. If you click the flyout, it'll actually break that down to different subgroups. So for your economically disadvantaged students, we see only 30% of the students were proficient. So that's fairly significant, right? So within the population, 66% of your students at Portsmouth Middle School are proficient, but for the kids who are economically disadvantaged living in poverty, only 30% of them are proficient. So that's certainly something that Portsmouth might want to consider, and are there things they can do for helping those students who might come from families living in some type of poverty. English language learners, on the other hand, have 50%, so it's fairly strong, not quite as strong as the overall ELA. But you can look at different indicators, different groups, and see how they're doing. Anytime you click on a flyout, you click on it again to make it shrink. So once it opens, click it again to close it. I'm not going to go through the detail of these. I will mention, as we mentioned earlier, look at things in context. So here it's showing you Portsmouth Middle School, how they did. So 66% of their students were successful or were proficient. However, if you look at the entire district, 73%. So evidently, probably the elementary school and maybe the 11th grade where the students are tested are doing stronger than the middle school. So something that, again, the Portsmouth might want to consider. However, the state is 52%, so they're still doing quite a bit better than the state overall. Let me jump to Educator, just to make you aware of some of the indicators that are here. So for educators, there's a couple of things that we provide. One is the percentage of classes that are taught by teachers that are certified in the subject they're teaching. How many are on an intern? So these are intern educators who are working towards their certificate but are allowed to teach within a classroom. And then experienced educators. So these are educators that have at least 3 years of experience in New Hampshire and have been doing an effective job in their position. Typically, you'll see very high numbers for educators certified and also experience, but it'll vary. So some school districts might only have 70% of their students who are experienced. And one of the things I talked about earlier is you can actually look at some of that information across the entire state. And so maybe that's something we'll look at in a little while when we get to iExplore. The other thing you see here is cost average teacher salaries. So you'll see that, and you can see that again over time. You can see how it compares to the entire state as well. So the state, 62,000 on average, Portsmouth is 78,000 on average. Last thing I think I'll show you is finance information. And again, if you've got questions about any of these things, please let me know. I'm happy to answer them. But as you're all in the legislature, I know finance is frequently an area that's of interest. You'll see, and I should have mentioned some of these indicators earlier. This says coming soon. That's what CS stands for. And again, if you hover over it, it tells you that it'll be available soon. We don't have 21 data in yet for finance, but if I switch back to 2020, and I didn't mention that before, but you can see different years here. You can see finance information. Now we're looking at a middle school. And so something else I need to point out is sometimes the information is a little different at the school level than at the district level. Finance is one of those examples. For the most part, financial data is provided to the state at the district level, not the school level. So you'll see school selections will not display revenue information. If I switch, instead of looking at the school, we look at the entire district. And so if you click on school list, you can choose from that school, or you can look at the whole district. So if I choose the district, and again, remember, I have to click this a second time to make it shrink. Now you'll see a lot more finance information. So I want to point that out. If you're looking for finance information, you typically need to look at the district level. And now you can look at the total expenditures. You can look at what percentage of the money is used for pupil transportation, how much money is used for special programming or regular instruction, et cetera. You can also see some of the revenue information broken down. Where do they get the revenue? The other thing I'll point out is we didn't see college before. Again, some of these tabs will differ slightly based on the school you're looking at. So if you're looking at a middle school, of course, we don't get college information. If you're looking at a high school or the district, we will. So this is some basic information about schools. Again, the concept here of iReport is it's a report card information at the end, primarily at the end of the year, about how a school or district is doing. I won't jump to it, but if you click download, you can actually download a PDF of all this information. So it's kind of one page, or it might be a couple of pages that provide all the information about your school or district. I encourage you to do that. It actually lets you create a PDF. It tells you how to print it. So it's one thing that you can use if you want to get something printed out and take with you to a legislative meeting. Okay, let me jump to iExplorer. So as I mentioned before, there's kind of two ways we can get to iExplorer. One is I can go to the main page and click iExplorer. The other is that I could be in a page here and I can click on this arrow. Anytime you see these arrows here, pointing up or pointing down, they will let you jump to iExplorer, and I can jump and look at iExplorer and look across the entire district. So here we're looking at cost per pupil for Portsmouth. I might want to get a better understanding of how does that compare to other districts throughout the state. So I can say, I'm curious about cost per pupil. I'm going to click on this, and now it's going to bring me to iExplorer. I may have to change the year. I'm not sure if it's going to stay at 2020. It didn't, so let me change the year back here to 2020. And now we're in iExplorer, we're looking at that same indicator, cost per pupil, but now we're seeing it for all districts across the state. And you can choose which districts you want to look at, or you can look at certain districts. But iExplorer lets you explore these different types of indicators. Let me actually change years, and I'm going to actually have us look at 2019. In 2020, we didn't have achievement. We didn't take the state assessment test because of the pandemic. And that's why this graph here was to the right was looking a little funny, because there weren't any achievement data. But now looking at 2019, I want to explain what this graph on the right shows. So here, again, we're looking at average cost per pupil. And on the right, what we're seeing is a graph that looks at cost per pupil compared to math and ELA proficiency. So on the right axis is we're seeing what percentage of your students are proficient in math and ELA. So as you go to the right, you get higher numbers. So this district out here got a very high percentage of their students, Newcastle, New Hampshire, who are proficient in both math and ELA, almost more than 90% of their students. You can also see cost per pupil. So here's a school, I'm not going to call them out, but there's a school, I guess I might as well because it's public information. There's a school that's spending a lot of money on the Waterville Valley on their per pupil expenditure. They probably have a very small enrollment. Here are schools that are spending less per pupil, the ones down here. One of the things, as the commissioner mentioned, is that this actually gives us a coefficient line. And what it's trying to show us is there a correlation between math and cost per pupil? And so here we're actually seeing, for this data that we're looking at in New Hampshire, there's not really a correlation. It gives you what's called a Pearson R value. You need to have a Pearson R value. It has to be closer to really 0.7 or 0.8 to show you any kind of substantial correlation. And even 0.5 may be a moderate, but 0.19 is not saying it's this, at least for this data, there's no correlation. I should also point out that correlation does not mean causation. So it doesn't mean that because you're spending less money, you might have poor results or more money, better results. It's not saying that there's a causation, but it's saying that they may be correlated. However, again, in this example, it's showing us that there's no correlation. So it's a good, if you're a legislature and you want to have this conversation about, what is the relationship between money and performance, there isn't a direct correlation, at least from this data. You can see schools here that have very high percent of their students proficient, but they're spending less money. You've got students here that are spending more money, the same proficiency. Same thing down here. You've got schools that aren't spending very much money and having low proficiency, and then schools that are spending quite a bit more money and having, again, having low proficiency. So I just point that out. Yep.
Thanks. Yeah, we have a question about cost per pupil and what is included in cost per pupil.
Yeah. I believe the answer to that is that it's the full cost. So when we went back, let me see if I go back to iReport. This full cost of expenditures divided by the total number of pupils. So I'm pretty sure it includes, all the costs, including the transportation and the instruction, special education, et cetera. If I find out it's different, I'll let you know, but that's my understanding.
Thank you.
And actually, another thing I'll point out is, I don't know if it's going to answer this, but let's see if it does. There's this area called definitions. And so this is a place that I recommend you come to as well. But this allows us to look for different characteristics within the system and get information about what it represents. So if I choose average cost per pupil, let's see what it tells us. So this should give us a little bit of a definition, and we'll see if it gives us enough information. So it's total current expenditures less food service revenue, transportation expenses, tuition expenses, capital expenses, and summer school expenses divided by the average daily membership. So total expenditures less transportation, less tuition expenses. Okay, so it's the total expenditures divided by membership, but they are taking these things out. So tuition expenditures. So if I'm, for instance, in Greenland, New Hampshire, I have expenses within my budget, but I send my kids to Portsmouth High School. So the tuition for those students going to Portsmouth are taken out of the cost, but you're only dividing the cost by your K-8 students, your membership students. That's why it pulls out tuition. So it also pulls out transportation too, though. So anyway, that answers your question. Thanks for asking. I was not exactly right, so I'm glad we looked at it. Okay, so that's the explore function. Let me just jump to I'm going to jump to some of these. I'm not going to do compare. Compare is pretty straightforward. It's just like it lets you take a factor and look at it across multiple schools. Discover is an area that I want to show you because it is a little bit different and gives you some neat information. This allows you to see whether there's a correlation across any two variables. So this other area where we're doing explore, it always shows you whatever indicator you're looking at and how that correlates to math and ELA proficiency. So you're always looking at any factor compared to proficiency. In the Discover tool, you can actually choose any variables regardless of what they're about. So for example, I can take an indicator like we had before. Let's take the cost per pupil. Let's see if the average cost per pupil has a relationship to the let's see, to the percentage of teachers who are experienced. So is there a relationship between the experience of educators and the cost per pupil? And so here we now are looking at those indicators. So we're looking at cost per pupil here. We're looking at the experience of teachers. And in fact, we see that there's no R value. So there's no relationship between the cost per pupil and the experience of educators. I suspect in part because the cost between the differentiation between the experience is probably not big enough. But this lets you look at two different variables. We could look at, experience versus achievement in some area as well. I think I'm going to stop there. There's, in terms of showing you just the system, you can download data as we talked about before. I guess I'll just show you this briefly. You can click on download data. You can pick any indicator across the state. And so I can choose class size, which is what we have. And this will show you the information as much as we have for the past 5 years. And you can download that to a CSV file for every school in the state or district. Okay, what I want to do with the last little bit of time here is I want to show you kind of things that I thought about in my mind, as a legislature, maybe I would have if I was a legislature. So we'll see if I'm right or not, if these are valid questions. But here are some examples. So for example, maybe I'm a legislature and I understand that my school district in the area that I'm representing switched math programs a few years ago. I've had some of my parents call up and they're concerned about the school or the math program or something. I heard they've changed systems and I want to see how their performance has changed over the past 3 years, because I know they changed the program a few years ago. So I'm looking at a school. That's what I'm concerned about, or my school district. And I want to see how my school district did in terms of math achievement. So because I'm looking at one school or district, I know to go to iReport. So here I would go to iReport, and I could choose my school district, and we're looking at Portsmouth, so I'll just stick with this. I go to achievement because I'm looking at the achievement. I want to look at it over time. And so as I mentioned earlier, in most of these things like achievement, environment, educator, they all have a time section. So here, if I look at achievement over time, we didn't have an assessment in 2021, but I can look here for 2018-19, and I can see that it looks like we are going up a little bit. I can pull in 2021 because we do have data for last year for achievement. So we can see how we did there. So here we can see that the achievement stayed fairly static. We went down a little bit in math, as math was the area we're looking at. But there are also other things confounding that factor in terms of the pandemic for 2021. But that would be a way that you would look at achievement over time. I'll give you another one. I'm interested in how students on an IEP performed in my town's middle school. And how did that compare to the state? So again, maybe I'm looking at how students on IEP, meaning they're special students with special needs, students are special education. Maybe again, I'm getting calls from some parents in town and they're questioning whether how the school's doing for those students. So again, I can go back. Again, we're talking about a school. We want to compare it to the state. So there's a couple of ways to do this. I think the easiest way to do this, so I'm going to show you just to give you a way that you can look at state data. As I mentioned before, again, we'll just stick with Portsmouth. If I click on the flyout here for ELA, I can see how students with disabilities, so students within IEP, how they did. So 30% of the students were proficient in ELA. If I click in math, I can see that 24% of the students on disabilities were proficient in math. So if I want to look at how the state did, one way to do that is if you go to the bottom of here, there's something called state reports. If I click on the state report, it's going to bring me to the same kind of look and feel, this iReport, but now this is a report card for the entire state. So here I can look, here we're looking at Portsmouth. Now we're looking at the entire state. And now we can click on the flyout for the entire state, and we can see for students on disabilities, only 15% of students on disabilities with disabilities are proficient in ELA, whereas in Portsmouth, 30% are. So, from a Portsmouth perspective, it looks like they're doing fairly well in terms of the percentage of students on an IEP who are proficient compared to the state. In ELA, you could do the same thing in that. Okay, let me jump to another one. Okay, we at the state legislature are discussing funding for towns with high poverty. And I want to reach out to some schools who are doing well with high populations of economically disadvantaged families. So again, maybe we're having this conversation about how can we fund, and should we be funding schools in towns that have significant populations in poverty? And I want to talk to some school districts around the state and find out what they're doing that seems to be leading to some success for their students in math and ELA. Or in this case, we'll look at ELA, English Language Arts. So what I want to do is look for certain schools in the state that meet these characteristics. They have high populations of students living in poverty. And maybe they're schools that at least have fairly large number of students, at least 100 students or so that's not even that large. So again, now we want to look across the entire state. So we're going to go to iExplore. We're going to go to this area called search. And I mentioned before that I wanted to show you this search. Search, I think, is a really cool feature. And I highly recommend you playing around with it, especially if you want to look at schools across the state and how they're doing. So what we do in search is we want to look at proficiency. So we talked about looking at English language proficiency. So we're going to look at the percentage of students who are proficient in ELA. And but as soon as I select that, it's going to now show me all the schools or districts in the state. As a matter of fact, I want to look at schools. So I'm going to click at schools here. So I'm looking at schools across the state. And it's showing me all the schools across the state and how they're doing. So again, as we saw before, schools like, this is the one in Newcastle, have a very high percentage of students are proficient. But what we wanted to look at was schools that also have high poverty. So I'm going to choose economically disadvantaged students. And so now it's going to show me for each one of these schools what percentage of the students are living in poverty. So obviously in Newcastle, they have a very small number of students living in poverty, actually for many of these towns. I may also want to consider the size of the school. So I can go down here and choose total enrollment, because we talked about schools that at least have a substantial number of students. I could select another one. I don't have to, but I'm going to, just for the sake of doing it, I'll show you classes taught by experienced educators. What I can do now is I can actually filter. So rather than having to look through this list, I can say I only want schools that have at least 40% of the students living from families of poverty. And so now all of a sudden, the list of schools down below are only showing me schools that have at least 40% of their students living in homes of poverty. They're eligible for free and reduced lunch. And I apologize, I use the word poverty. Eligible for free and reduced lunch, means that you're at a certain level in terms of your income, below a certain level, and that's what this is representing. Total enrollment, maybe I'm not so concerned with very small schools, like schools that have only 38 students. I want to look at a little bit larger schools. So I'm going to, I think I'll say 200 students. So they have to have at least 200 students. It could be any number you want. So now all of a sudden I've got a list of schools that are still doing fairly well, at least based on having a large percentage of students living or eligible for free and reduced lunch. And so now I may want to say, I want to take a look at Jaffrey Grade School. I want to call them. I want to call Mount Lebanon School. I want to call the Milford Lakeway School. All of those schools have a fairly high percentage of students doing well in English, but also have a significant portion of their students living in poverty, economically disadvantaged houses. So another example, hopefully that's helpful. Finally, a couple other ones as a legislator. Perhaps I'm interested to know if there's a correlation between cost per student and math achievement. We actually did that one before, so I'm not going to show you that one again, but this was that ability to go into here and under discover, compare the two factors, or you can do it also under the explore area. And then finally, a bill regarding graduation rates being discussed. Perhaps I want to know what graduation rates look like across the state. So again, and maybe I want to look at how they look in the North Country. Maybe I represent the North Country. So again, I'm looking at something across the state. So I'm going to go to iExplore. Within iExplore, the easy way to do that is just click on Explore. I can pick the indicator that I want to look at, which was graduation rate. So here I choose graduation rate. And we have what's called a 4- and a 5-year graduation rate. They're basically just what they say. 4-year graduation rate is what percentage of students graduate high school within 4 years. We know some students take longer, and it's, if it takes you 5 years, nothing wrong with that. So that's also a good indicator, and it's great to know that schools are able to keep students a little bit longer and help them graduate. So we offer both of those. If you choose the 5-year graduation rate, I just chose that as an example. We actually don't have graduation rate yet, I guess. Oh no, we do. But I want to look at, instead of districts, because not all districts have in high school, I'm going to look at just schools. And I really only care about looking at high schools, because obviously this is not an indicator that is meaningful for elementary or middle schools. So I'm going to apply that just to high schools. And so now we get a list of all the high schools in the state and what percentage of the students graduated within 5 years. And as you can see, for the most part, we're fairly high. New Hampshire has, for the most part, over 80–90% of their students graduating, which is a great thing. You also, as I mentioned in the prompt, you could represent the North Country, and maybe you want to just focus on the North Country. So you can actually choose the region here and just choose North Country and apply that. And now we can see just the schools in the North Country and how they're doing. Also fairly strong profile, having 100% of their students graduate. That's fantastic. So some good information there, different ways you can take a look at it. So I think we're getting fairly late in here, so I want to kind of wrap it up. I don't know if there's any questions, Lauren. If not, hopefully that gave you a nice kind of overview of what iPlatform offers. Really, it's a great way to take a look at data throughout the state. And we hope you'll share this with the other legislators. And these recordings are posted, whether it's this one or one similar that will be posted. So please take a look for those. I'm going to pause, Lauren, and I'm going to then just run through some other slides if there's nothing.
We don't have any questions at this point.
Okay. So let me just share a couple of slides. And again, you've had access to this PowerPoint, but here are some hints. So you might want to read through these as you're going through things like I mentioned around hovering, things like if you're in a drop down, you can type some letters and jump right to it. So take a look at these and remember to pay attention to that Pearson R value. You can Google Pearson R value and find out lots more about it. Also, some updates, the financial data, like we saw that there wasn't 2021 data yet. That will be coming out hopefully either next week or maybe a little bit into March, but we should be getting the financial data to you fairly shortly, as well as some other data. There's going to be some new data where you can actually look at grade level comparisons. That'll be a nice addition to the system that's coming out soon in February or early March. In April, we're going to be getting some more data about charter schools, more information about IDA, which is your special education population. That'll be loaded in April. And then there'll be some more indicators and some more information about some growth and dashboards available in June. So we are continuing to make changes. We're looking for your feedback, so please offer it, and we'll try to get some some additional enhancements into the system. We've held these trainings, and there's some more trainings coming up for parents and researchers and other organizations. So please spread the word about those. I will show you real quick on the website that, again, it's this iPlatform website. There's a training page. So if you click on this training resource under iPlatform on the department's website, you'll actually see links to the webinars. You'll also see videos at the bottom here. So I encourage you here to share videos or take a look at it and share information about other trainings. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'm going to leave this slide up with our contact information. Please don't hesitate to contact myself or Lauren or Gina. You've got our emails. You've got my phone number. We are welcome to and happy to answer questions. We don't want you to struggle, but please, it's a public site. There's no login. Go and play around with it. And thank you very much for taking the time to see what's here. Lauren, anything to add?
No, I just popped the link in one more time into the chat. And so everyone should have access at this point.
Great. So thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your evening and a wonderful rest of the week. I hope you all enjoyed this balmy weather today, and we'll be looking to be back to some snow later this week, which should be nice for the mountains. Take care and have a wonderful night.